Suleiman the Magnificent. What a name. He ruled the Ottoman Empire from 1520 to 1566, and he's celebrated for significantly expanding its territory and instituting major reforms, earning him the moniker the Lawgiver. His reign, often regarded as the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, saw notable military conquests in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe, including the Siege of Vienna. But he also fostered a cultural renaissance within the empire, patronizing the arts and commissioning grand architectural projects like the Suleymaniye Mosque, designed by the esteemed architect Mimar Sinan. Internationally, he maintained diplomatic relations with key European powers, such as France, positioning the Ottomans as a central player in Renaissance politics and challenging the dominance of the Habsburgs. His multifaceted legacy not only shaped the historical and cultural landscape of Turkey, but also influenced the broader politics of 16th century Europe. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, great to have you with me. And if you're coming back, great to have you back again. Supporting the channel is as easy as enjoying the channel. Just enjoy the videos is fine. But a like and subscribe is only 2 clicks away, and there's a few links in the description if you want to go above and beyond. And why don't you leave a comment down below and tell me where you're watching from. I really do enjoy learning where everybody is in the world. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the video for today. The great Suleiman the Magnificent was born in Trabzon, which is on the Black Sea, possibly around the 6th of November 1494. A little bit of a debate around that specific date, but we generally arrive there. His father, Sultan Selim, later Selim I, and his mother, Hafsa Sultan, a concubine who later converted to Islam, raised him. And his education, starting at the age of 7 in Constantinople's Topkapi Palace, covered the usual gamut given to a royal subject. We're talking science, literature, theology, history, and of course, you can't go without the military strategy. You're going to need that later. Well, during his formative period, he also developed a significant friendship with a Greek slave named Bargali Ibrahim, who actually rose to become his most trusted advisor. However, he was later executed by Suleiman. Trust only gets you so far, I suppose. Well, Suleiman ascended to the throne in 1520, following his father's death, becoming the 10th Ottoman Sultan. Early descriptions by a Venetian envoy, Bartolomeo Contarini, depict him as a 26-year-old young sultan, tall, slender, and knowledgeable, and reportedly of good judgment. And that assessment seems to be true. His reign began with him addressing a rebellion in Damascus in 1521, quickly asserting his authority. It was a good start. Now his ambitious military campaigns began with the capture of Belgrade. That's right, modern-day Serbia, a critical stronghold of the Kingdom of Hungary in those days, which fell after a severe siege in 1521, despite its small garrison and lack of Hungarian reinforcements. This victory opened pathways for future Ottoman advances into Hungary and Austria. However, Suleiman then turned his attention to the Mediterranean, targeting the strategic island of Rhodes, which at the time was controlled by the Knights Hospitaller. After establishing a base at Marmaris Castle, Suleiman laid siege to Rhodes, but it lasted a lot longer than he thought it would. In fact, he was there for 5 months. But eventually it did fall, in 1522, and it allowed him to remove the Knights Hospitaller, whom he permitted to leave peacefully, despite significant Ottoman losses, estimated between 50 and 60,000. Due to combat, yes, but mainly disease. 5 months in a muddy and dirty camp. It's not good for your health. This conquest highlighted the strategic naval importance of Rhodes too, and showcased Suleiman's military prowess and his impact on Ottoman naval strategy. And so, as relations between the Ottoman Empire and Hungary kept getting worse and worse with every day, Suleiman resumed his campaign in Central Europe, culminating in the decisive Battle of Mohacs on the 29th of August, 1526, where he defeated Louis II of Hungary. Upon discovering the lifeless corpse of King Louis, Suleiman reportedly expressed a bit of remorse. We have a quote from him, a bit of a lament. Reportedly he said, "I came indeed in arms against him, but it was not my wish that he should be thus cut off before he scarcely tasted the sweets of life and royalty." Meanwhile, turmoil brewed in central Anatolia, where Turkmen tribes in Cilicia revolted under the leadership of one Kalendar Çelebi. Well, in the aftermath of Louis II's death, Hungarian nobles were in a bit of a debate about succession. Some had favoured Ferdinand. He was the ruler of neighbouring Austria, and he was also Louis II's brother-in-law. A pretty strong claim, and they cited previous agreements that the Habsburgs would inherit the Hungarian throne in the absence of heirs. However, there were others who supported one John Zapolya, a nobleman who was personally backed by Suleiman. Under Charles V and Ferdinand I, the Habsburgs retook Buda and asserted control over Hungary. Well, Suleiman wasn't going to sit around and just let that happen. He reacted swiftly, and he marched through the Danube Valley, reclaiming Buda in 1529. That same autumn, he laid siege to Vienna, marking the Ottoman Empire's most ambitious western expedition to date. Despite reinforcing Vienna's defences with 16,000 troops, the Austrians dealt Suleiman his first significant defeat, sparking a lasting rivalry between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs that spanned centuries. Suleiman's second attempt to conquer Vienna in 1532 faltered due to logistical challenges. The Ottoman forces were delayed by the siege of Guns and ultimately failed to reach Vienna. It didn't help that the weather was horrible, and supply lines were an issue. After all, they were a long way from home. In 1533, the Treaty of Constantinople was signed between Ferdinand I and Suleiman. Acknowledging Ottoman suzerainty, Ferdinand agreed to pay an annual tribute and recognized Suleiman as his, and I quote, father and suzerain. The treaty also elevated the Ottoman Grand Vizier to a position of equal rank to Ferdinand, solidifying a complex relationship marked by mutual recognition and strategic diplomacy. Well, we move on to the 1540s, where after 7 years of pretty easy sailing, I suppose we could say. Renewed conflict in Hungary provided Suleiman with an opportunity to seek vengeance for his earlier setback at Vienna. As they say, it's never too late to take revenge. Well, in 1541, the Habsburgs attempted to besiege Buda, but they were repelled. Subsequently, the Ottomans launched two successful campaigns, in 1541 and a few years later in 44, capturing several Habsburg fortresses in Hungary. These victories forced Ferdinand and Charles to negotiate a humbling 5-year treaty with Suleiman. Well, under its frankly embarrassing terms, Ferdinand was forced to relinquish his claim to the Kingdom of Hungary. It didn't help that he also had to pay an annual tribute to the Sultan for the Hungarian territories that he had retained. And there was a symbolic aspect too. The treaty did not refer to Charles V as Emperor, but rather as King of Spain. Quite a demotion. It prompted Suleiman to assert his own claim as the rightful Caesar of the lands, sticking to tradition, I suppose. Well, 1552, Suleiman's forces laid siege to Eger, situated in northern Hungary. Despite determined Ottoman attacks, Istvan Dobo and his defenders held firm at Eger Castle and successfully repelled the siege. Suleiman's father had prioritized conflict with Persia, you see, but upon assuming the throne, Suleiman had a different idea. He initially focused on controlling Ottoman interests in Europe while keeping Persia contained amidst its own regional challenges. And while Persia at the time was kind of busy fighting itself. However, tensions escalated when Shah Tahmasp of the Safavid dynasty took actions perceived as hostile towards Ottoman interests. First, he replaced a Baghdad governor loyal to Suleiman with his own appointee, and later, the governor of Bitlis defected to the Safavids. In response, in 1533, Suleiman dispatched his trusted advisor. Pargali Ibrahim Pasha was dispatched to reclaim Bitlis and occupy Tabriz, unopposed. And Suleiman himself joined in, not to be left out. He went on the campaign in 1534, advancing further into Persian territory. However, Shah Tahmasp avoided direct confrontation, opting instead for guerrilla tactics that harassed the advancing Ottoman forces through harsh terrain, reigniting memories of those baggage train troubles they had with those supply lines of earlier campaigns in Europe. In 1535, Suleiman triumphantly entered Baghdad, bolstered local support by restoring the old tomb of Abu Hanifa. He was the founder of the Hanafi school of Islamic law, which the Ottomans followed, and a lot of the locals wanted that tomb to come back. Bit of an institution. Well determined to decisively defeat the Safavids, grind them into the dust, Suleiman launched a second campaign, and this was between 1548 and 49. While Tahmasp had his old strategy, avoid open battle, guerrilla tactics. He resorted to scorched earth policies and forced the Ottoman army to endure a brutal winter in the Caucasus. Not fun at all, particularly when you're on the verge of starvation. But Suleiman's campaign did yield temporary gains in Tabriz, the Urmia region, and also western Azerbaijan, along with establishing Ottoman control in Van province and securing forts in modern-day Georgia. In 1553, Suleiman launched his third and final campaign against Shah Tahmasp. Well, at the start, the Ottomans had lost a few territories in Erzurum to the Shah's forces. In response to this, Suleiman swiftly recaptured the lost territories, crossed the upper Euphrates, and inflicted lots of damage on the Persian lands. But despite these efforts, the Shah's army persisted in avoiding direct engagement, resulting in a stalemate when neither side achieved significant gains. By 1555, both powers recognized the futility of prolonged conflict. Everybody was a little tired and thought they'd better seek a resolution. So, the Peace of Amasya was negotiated and signed by both parties. It established clear boundaries between the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid dynasty. Under this treaty, Armenia and Georgia were divided. Western Armenia, Western Kurdistan, and Western Georgia fell under the Ottoman control, while Eastern Armenia, Eastern Kurdistan, and Eastern Georgia remained under the control of the Safavids. Of course, I don't think many people were asking the Armenians, Kurdistanis, and Georgians what they thought of all this, but, well, I don't think they had much of a choice. Now, in terms of strategy, the Ottoman Empire gained substantial territories, including most of Iraq, including Baghdad, thereby securing access to the Persian Gulf, so it was a pretty good deal. The Safavids retained Tabriz as their capital, and they also maintained their northwestern territories in the Caucasus, including Dagestan and Azerbaijan, and they stood prior to the conflicts. Now, since 1518, Ottoman naval vessels had been actively navigating the Indian Ocean under the leadership of admirals like Seti Ali Reis and Hatim Suleiman Pasha. These voyages extended to key Mughal ports, such as Tata, Surat, and Janjira, where exchanges between the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great were documented through several official documents. In efforts to challenge Portuguese dominance and restore trade with the Mughal Empire, Suleiman personally led several naval campaigns. In 1538, Ottoman forces captured Aden in Yemen, strategically positioning themselves to launch raids against Portuguese holdings along the western coast of the Mughal Empire. Despite an initial setback at the siege of Diu later that year, the Ottomans regrouped at Aden, fortifying the city with a formidable array of 100 artillery pieces. Under Suleiman Pasha's command, they expanded their control, and they eventually seized Sana'a and consolidated their authority over the region of Yemen. Now, through effective control of the Red Sea, Suleiman contested Portuguese dominance over the trade routes and maintained a robust commercial tie with the Mughal Empire throughout most of the 16th century. Between 1526 and 43, he strategically deployed over 900 Turkish soldiers to support the Somali Adal Sultanate under the rule of Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi during their campaign to conquer the region known as Abyssinia. This alliance marked a significant Ottoman involvement in the Horn of Africa, bolstering their influence in a region far, far away. Proper international politics. Well, following the First Ajuran-Portuguese War, the Ottoman Empire absorbed the weakened Adal Sultanate into its domain in 1559. This expansion not only extended the Ottoman rule in Somalia, but it also enhanced their position in the Indian Ocean. It challenged Portuguese dominance alongside their ally, the Ajuran Empire, which, well, you probably haven't heard of it for a reason. It didn't last very long. The epithet of empire is, well, that's a debatable one. Well, in 1564, Suleiman received an embassy from Aceh, a powerful sultanate located on Sumatra. That's the main island in modern Indonesia, though correct me if I'm wrong if Java is larger. Now, the Achenese sought Ottoman support against the Portuguese, prompting Suleiman to launch an expedition to Aceh. Now, this military intervention proved crucial, as Ottoman forces provided substantial aid to the Indonesians against their resistance to the Portuguese encroachment. They didn't want to end up like Goa did. Watch my video on the Goa Inquisition if you want to know about that horrible turn of events. Well, of course, the discovery of new maritime trade routes by the Western European powers, mainly the Portuguese discovery of Good Hope in 1488, seemed to threaten the Ottoman trade monopoly. And they couldn't have that, couldn't they? It sparked a series of naval conflicts between the Ottomans and Portuguese throughout the 16th century in the Indian Ocean. The Ajuran Sultanate, allied with the Ottomans, countered Portuguese economic dominance by adopting a new coinage, which was modeled after the Ottoman currency, asserting their own economic independence from Portuguese control. As you can imagine, the Portuguese were not overly pleased with this. Well, having solidified his territorial gains on land, Suleiman faced troubling news of the loss of the fortress of Koroni in Morea, that's the modern-day Peloponnese in Greece, to Charles V's admiral Andrea Doria. The presence of Spanish forces in the eastern Mediterranean also raised concerns for Suleiman, signaling Charles V's ambition to challenge the Ottoman dominance in the region, and this town was not big enough for the both of them. To counter this threat and restore Ottoman naval supremacy in the Mediterranean, Suleiman appointed the renowned naval commander Khayr ad-Din, who was known to the Europeans as Barbarossa. So they made him the new admiral-in-chief. He was tasked with rebuilding and strengthening the Ottoman fleet to confront the growing Spanish influence. 1533, Charles V assembled a formidable Holy League consisting of 26,000 soldiers. This was comprised of Spaniards, Germans, Italians, and quite a few members of the Knights of St. John, and it achieved a decisive victory against the Ottomans at Tunis, that's in Tunisia, northern Africa. This defeat, coupled with ongoing conflicts, including a war against Venice the following year, prompted Suleiman to entertain alliances proposed by Francis I of France against Charles V. These diplomatic maneuvers were aimed at countering Charles's expanding influence and also consolidating the Ottoman defenses. A win-win. But the annexation of significant Muslim territories in North Africa by Charles V and subsequent conflicts set the stage for enduring piracy activities carried out by the Barbary pirates of North Africa. These pirate activities, viewed in the broader context of the wars against Spain, became a persistent challenge in the Mediterranean, that, well, would never go away. It took hundreds of years to get rid of the pirates, really. But you'd know that if you'd watched my pirate videos. Moving on. Well, in 1541, the Spanish launched an unsuccessful expedition to Algiers, aiming to assert control in the Mediterranean more thoroughly. And that following year, amidst the backdrop of the Italian wars and facing a common Habsburg enemy, the French King Francis I sought to revive the Franco-Ottoman alliance. Negotiations resulted in a renewed pact. The Ottoman Empire committed to sending 60,000 troops against the territories of the German King Ferdinand, and 150 galleys to challenge Charles V. In return, France pledged to attack Flanders, harass Spanish coasts with naval forces, and dispatch their own 40 galleys to support Ottoman operations in the Levant. Teamwork makes the dream work. Well, in August 1551, the Ottoman naval commander, Turgut Reis, seized Tripoli from the Knights of Malta. And that was a big deal. They'd held it since 1530, 21 years. Suleiman appointed Turgut Reis as commander of Tripoli in 1553, transforming the city into a hub for pirate raids in the Mediterranean, and establishing it as the capital of the Ottoman province of Tripolitania. There were efforts to recapture Tripoli in 1560 with a powerful Ottoman naval force, but they ended in defeat at the Battle of Djerba. Well, simultaneously, tensions were escalating with the Knights Hospitallers, known as the Knights of Malta since 1530, antagonized Muslim navies in the Mediterranean. In response, Suleiman assembled a substantial army to dislodge the knights from Malta. The Ottoman invasion of Malta in 1565 precipitated the Great Siege, lasting from the 18th of May to the 8th of September. Initially, the siege threatened Malta with destruction, reminiscent of the knights' earlier defense on Rhodes. But a Spanish relief force bolstered the defense just in time. Either way, the siege culminated in the loss of about 10,000 Ottoman troops, and the Maltese defenders were ultimately triumphant. And that was a pivotal moment depicted vividly in the frescoes of Matteo Perez de Alico in the hall of St. Michael and St. George. Now, Sultan Suleiman, who was now known as the Magnificent in the West, and Kanuni, or the lawgiver among his own subjects, governed strictly within the framework of Islamic law, the Sharia, which he could not alter, as it was considered divine. Can't change what God tells you to do. That's the rules. However, Suleiman wielded authority over the Kanuns, a distinct set of laws covering criminal justice, land ownership and taxation, which were entirely within his own personal jurisdiction. To streamline legal practices, he compiled and consolidated judgments from his 9 predecessors, creating a unified legal code known as the Kanun Osmani, or the Ottoman laws. This legal framework, crafted within the guidance of his Grand Mufti, Ebu Sud, endured for more than 3 centuries, adapting to the empire's evolving needs, while also respecting the goalposts of Islamic principles that they had to operate between. And his reign also marked significant protections for Jewish subjects. A bit surprising, isn't it? Well, in response to the advice of his trusted advisor, the Spanish Jew Moses Hamon, Suleiman issued a firman condemning blood libel against Jews, safeguarding them from false accusations. Furthermore, Suleiman reformed criminal and police laws, reducing severe penalties and introducing fines for specific offenses. Economically, he implemented diverse taxes on goods, imports and exports, and trade profits to sustain the empire's finances. All very successful reforms. Dare I say, magnificent? Perhaps so. Well, under Suleiman's patronage, higher educational institutions known as medresas flourished, offering university-level education where graduates could serve as imams, which is an Islamic priest, or educators. These centers of learning were very important parts of the mosque complexes, alongside libraries, baths, soup kitchens, residences, and hospitals too. All, of course, contributing to the overall public welfare and educational situation throughout the Ottoman Empire. Now, at this time, the empire also experienced a flourishing of cultural and artistic achievements, marking a golden age. At the heart of this cultural renaissance was the El-i-Khiref, or Community of Craftsmen, an extensive network of artistic societies, headquartered at the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople. This institution oversaw the work of hundreds of artists and craftsmen, who, after completing their apprenticeships, could advance in rank and even receive salaries paid in quarterly installments. Quarterly is a bit too much, though, isn't it? It's too long between drinks, I think. Well, I suppose none of them were drinking, but you know what I mean. Monthly is okay. You go with monthly. Well, payroll records from early as 1526 revealed the scale of Suleiman's patronage. It listed 40 societies with 600 members. Well, the community of the craftsmen, of course, attracted the most skilled from across the empire and beyond, including the Islamic world and recently annexed European territories. And it was a diversity that led to a rich fusion of Turkish, Arabic, and European artistic traditions. They had a wide range of artisans, bookbinders, furriers, painters, jewelers, and goldsmiths, really a sight to be seen. And while earlier rulers had drawn heavily from Persian cultural influences, evidenced by Suleiman's father, Selim I, who composed poetry in Persian, Suleiman's patronage was quite a distinct shift. His support helped the Ottoman Empire forge its own unique artistic identity. They didn't have to piggyback on other people's identities from previous times. No, they were their own people. They had their own culture. It was different to the Persians. It was different to the other kingdoms around them. It was something special, by them and for everyone. And Suleiman himself wasn't just watching from the sidelines. No, he was an accomplished poet, writing in both Persian and Turkish, under the name Muhibi, which also means lover. How romantic. Some of his verses actually became Turkish proverbs, such as the well-known saying, translated to English, "Everybody aims at the same meaning," but there are many versions of the story. There's something to that. Well, upon the death of his young son Mehmed in 1543, Suleiman composed a poignant chronogram to mark the year. Peerless among princes, my Sultan Mehmed. This chronogram uses Arabic abjad numerals totaling 955, which corresponds to the Islamic calendar year 1543. The literary work under Solomon's rule was enriched by notable figures, such as Fuzuli and Barker. The literary historian Elias John Wilkinson Gibb remarked that at no time, even in Turkey, was greater encouragement given to poetry than at the time during the reign of Suleiman. Now, there is the most celebrated verse of Suleiman, which reflects his perspective on wealth and power. And he wrote this from the pen of Suleiman himself. The people think of wealth and power as the greatest fate, but in this world a spell of health is the best state. What men call sovereignty is a worldly strife and constant war. Worship of God is the highest throne, the happiest of all estates. Of course, translating it to English loses a bit of the nuance, but you get the point. Well, it wasn't just poets and paintings and all the rest. He was also renowned for his extensive patronage of monumental architecture, and not just in Constantinople, all over the empire. His ambition was to transform Constantinople into a prominent center of Islamic civilization. Under his rule, numerous bridges, mosques, palaces, and various charitable and social establishments were constructed. The most significant of these projects were designed by the Sultan's chief architect, Mimar Sinan, under whom Ottoman architecture reached its peak. Sinan was responsible for over 300 monuments throughout the empire, including his two most celebrated works, the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul and the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, the latter built during the reign of Suleiman's son, Selim II. In addition to his architectural legacy, Suleiman had a passion for gardens and horticulture. His sheikh cultivated a white tulip in one of the gardens, which caught the interest of court nobles, and this led to a wider cultivation of tulips, with images of the flower appearing in rugs and ceramics. Suleiman is credited with prompting large-scale cultivations of the plant, and it is believed that tulips spread throughout Europe partly due to the gifts exchanged by diplomats visiting his court. Suleiman fell deeply in love with Hürrem Sultan, a harem girl from Ruthenia, then part of Poland. Western diplomats, noting the palace gossip about her, referred to her as Roxolana, alluding to her Ruthenian origins. The daughter of an Orthodox priest, she was captured by the Tatars from Crimea and sold into slavery in Constantinople, and eventually she ascended through the harem ranks to become Suleiman's favorite. Hürrem, who was also once a concubine, became Suleiman's legal wife, which shocked both palace observers and the city's residents. Obvious reasons. He also broke tradition by allowing Hürrem to stay with him at the court for the rest of her life, contrary to the norm where imperial heirs and their concubines were sent to govern distant provinces and rarely returned unless their progeny succeeded to the throne. Well, we have something quite sweet now. He composed a poem for this Hürrem, and it goes like this. Throne of my lovely niche, my wealth, my love, my moonlight, my most sincere friend, my confidant, my very existence, my Sultan, my one and only love, the most beautiful among the beautiful. My springtime, my merry-faced love, my daytime, my sweetheart, laughing leaf, my plants, my sweet, my rose, the only one who does not distress me in this room, my Istanbul, my Karaman, the earth of my Anatolia, my Badakhshan, my Baghdad and Khorasan, my woman of the beautiful hair, my love of the slanted brow, my love of the eyes full of misery, I'll sing your praises always. I, lover of the tormented heart, Muhibi of the eyes full of tears, I am happy. That was from Sultan Suleiman, under his pen name Muhibi, for his darling Hurrem. Now, for a moment, let's talk about Pargali Ibrahim Pasha. Before his downfall, he was inseparable friends, and, well, rumor has it, the relationship between him and Suleiman may have been saucier than first anticipated. But that's just speculation. Well, he is referred to by his chroniclers as both the favorite and also the executed. And, well, historians suggest that Suleiman is remembered for his passion for two of his slaves, for his beloved Ibrahim, when the Sultan was a hot-blooded youth, for his beloved Hurrem, when he was mature. Well, originally Ibrahim was a Christian from Parga, that's a place in Epirus, but he was captured during the Ottoman-Venetian War of 1499 to 1503, and subsequently he was gifted to Suleiman as a slave, possibly in 1514. Well, he was converted to Islam, and Suleiman appointed him as the royal falconer, promoted later on to the first officer of the royal bedchamber. There are reports, in fact 87 of them, that report that the two actually slept together in the same bed, which is of course more than a little haram. Suleiman also constructed a lavish palace for Ibrahim on the ancient Hippodrome. That was Istanbul's main forum outside of the Hagia Sophia and the main palace, Topkapi Palace, that is. Well, despite his brand new residence, Ibrahim sometimes paid little late-night visits with Suleiman I at the palace, and the Sultan occasionally went over to his place, reportedly not returning until the morning. Well, during his 13 years as Grand Vizier, Ibrahim's rapid rise and incredible wealth made him more than a few enemies at court. You don't earn that money for nothing. But from those reports that we just mentioned, perhaps he was working pretty hard for it. Well, Suleiman's suspicion of Ibrahim began to grow after a quarrel between him and the finance secretary. Well, of course, the conflict ended when Ibrahim convinced Suleiman to effectively lead the poor fellow to the gallows. And Ibrahim also supported Mustafa as the successor, which was clashing with the Hurrem Sultan, who wanted her sons to inherit the throne. Now that ought to get you a few enemies. And ultimately he fell from grace with both Hurrem and Suleiman. Suleiman consulted his Qadi, who recommended that, well, it was just easier to execute Ibrahim. He then ordered assassins to wait until Ibrahim was asleep and go in and strangle him to death. Not a good way to go. Technically going in your sleep, but I'm sure you would have woken up during that horrible ordeal. Well, Sultan Suleiman's two known consorts, Mahidevran and Hurrem, bore him 6 sons, and 4 of them survived past 1550s, that being Cihangir, Bayezid, Mustafa, and Selim. Among these, the oldest one, Mustafa, who was Mahidevran's son, not Hurrem's. Although Hurrem is often implicated in the intrigues surrounding the nomination of a successor, there isn't any concrete evidence that link her directly to the plots. And despite being Suleiman's wife, Hurrem held no official role publicly. But she did exercise significant political influence. That's got to count for something. Either way, the Ottoman Empire did not have a formal mechanism for designating a successor until the reign of Ahmed I, and therefore successions typically would involve the deaths of rival princes to prevent civil unrest and rebellions. At least that was the idea. There was plenty of civil unrest and rebellions to just pepper that lovely Ottoman history. Well, by 1552, as the campaigns against Persia began, Rustem was appointed as commander-in-chief, and the intrigue against Mustafa began to intensify. Rustem was concerned, you see, with Mustafa's potential claim to the throne, and he sent one of Suleiman's most trusted men to report to the soldiers, since the Sultan was not there to lead them, believed it was time for a younger prince to take control. He also spread rumors that Mustafa was amenable to such a claim. Upon returning from his Persian campaign the following summer, Suleiman called Mustafa to his tent. When Mustafa entered, Suleiman's eunuchs immediately attacked him, and after a prolonged struggle, the poor old Mustafa was strangled with a bowstring. Cihangir is said to have died of grief a few months later, after hearing about the horrible fate of Mustafa. Following Mustafa's death, Selim and Bayezid, the only 2 remaining brothers, were assigned to commands in different parts of the Ottoman Empire. But civil war erupted between the 2 as each sought their own dominance. Selim, with the support of his father's army, and quite a formidable one at that, defeated Bayezid at the Battle of Konya in 1559. Bayezid and his 4 sons ran away to the Safavid Shah for refuge, and after diplomatic negotiations, Suleiman demanded that Bayezid either be extradited or killed. In exchange for a substantial sum of treasure, the Shah permitted a Turkish executioner to strangle Bayezid and his sons in 1561, and this cleared the way for Selim's succession to the throne 5 years later. Geez, he really likes strangling people, doesn't he? They should have called him Suleiman the Strangler. Well, maybe the Magnificent sounds a little bit better. Well, on the 6th of September, 1566, Suleiman, who had embarked on a military campaign to Hungary, passed away before the conclusion of the siege at Szigetvar. He passed away at the age of 71. His Grand Vizier chose to keep the Sultan's death a bit of a secret during the retreat, to ensure a smooth succession of Selim II to the throne. And you don't want to cause any panic while you're out there on campaign, surely. Following his death, his body was transported back to Istanbul for burial. His body, heart, liver, and several other organs were interred in Turbek, a site near Szigetvar. This burial site eventually became a rather revered location, and they made a grand mausoleum, which gained a reputation as a holy and significant pilgrimage site. Got to stop there on the way to Mecca for sure. Within a decade of its establishment, a mosque and a Sufi hospice were erected in the vicinity, and the site was maintained by a garrison of several dozen men, protecting and preserving its sanctity forever. Over 30 years after his death, Sultan Selim was depicted as a military prodigy by the English playwright William Shakespeare in The Merchant of Venice. In Act 2, Scene 1, the Prince of Morocco boasts of his military prowess by claiming that he defeated Suleiman in 3 battles. And to finish up, we have an inscription from 1537 on the citadel of Bender, Moldova. I am God's slave and sultan of this world. By the grace of God, I am head of Muhammad's community. God's might and Muhammad's miracles are my companions. I am Suleiman, in whose name the hutbah is read in Mecca and Medina. In Baghdad I am the Shah, in Byzantine realms the Caesar, and in Egypt the Sultan, who sends his fleets to the seas of Europe, the Maghreb and India. I am the Sultan who took the crown and throne of Hungary, and granted them to a humble slave. The voivode Petru raised his head in revolt, but my horse's hoofs ground him into dust, and I conquered the land of Moldavia. Quite a stunning self-assessment, don't you think? Well, he's not really lying. I'd like to thank my top-tier patrons: Britt, Charles, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Wendy, Tim, James, Erin, Scott, Dark, Ben, and Melissa. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Same time, same place, here on YouTube. Lots of love to you all, and good night.